Just a few minutes into the first episode of the ridiculously named SSSS.Dynazenon, we have a scene with our main protagonist Yomogi Asanaka having a meal with his mother and her boyfriend. As a gift for entering high school, the boyfriend gives Yomogi some money. And at this point, though we have seen him being charitable, we still don't know him well enough to know how he'd react. One might expect him to happily take it and splurge on something or add to his savings, as it's clear that they aren't rich and a high school boy would no doubt need the money. Or maybe he'd straight out reject it or throw it out after taking it, in a classic show of resentment towards a potential partner for his mum that he disapproves of, the likes of which we've all seen before in all manner of stories. But what he actually does here is very telling. He sheepishly accepts the money with gratitude, and then with a curiously downcast look on his face, he inserts it into the restaurant's donation box. And this immediately gave me a ton of information and feelings during my first watch. This sad look and this charity, along with the few minutes of Yomogi that we had seen prior, it all feels very sincere, and it gives the impression of a kind and caring soul that isn't really in the best place. But he's not in the worst place either. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what this evoked in me, but I just got this sense of strange discontent and longing from Yomogi here. It isn't an indication of any clear and explicit unhappiness or resentment, but it just shows that he isn't feeling secure, confident, and happy with his life at this point either. But regardless, he persists with small acts of compassion because that's who he is. This moment immediately endeared me to Yomogi. It made me feel a connection with him and got me hooked in seeing where his life would take him, having had such a clear picture of who he is fed to me in such a minimalistic way. It's all achieved with just a tiny little touch, just one scene and one gesture, and this is something Dynazenon excels at. These consistent and scattered understated touches are one of the core characteristics of this story's identity, presenting subtext and building intrigue and character work to paint a cohesive picture and keep threads moving along, introducing plot points or emotional beats and providing constant substance while just conveying this sense of weight and pathos, which may actually be the most important part. And these scenes vary, but more often than not, a common thread among them is that they key us into the deepest mental states of our characters, many of which end up being very similar to one another in displaying that same sense of lingering, lonely angst that we see through the scene with Yomogi. We have Yume's pair of ankhs shown in glimpses after she finds it in the late Kano's room, the constant reminder that she carries around of the event that took her sister from her that preoccupies her mind and prevents her from moving forward for a huge portion of the story. This can then be combined with her erratic behavior at school, the fact that her mother mutters annoyance at her lack of application, that her father seems to have made a habit of drinking straight after dinner, and that the parents' relationship seems to be quite rocky, to easily surmise that this family has some lingering scars.
ただ、今ちょっと楽になりたいだけ。
And then there's Gauma's rather reflective attitude upon arriving in the city, his serious and resentful disposition after being questioned about his relationship with the eugenicists, and his constant touches of sentiment and quiet happiness throughout, contrasting the over-the-top characterization he shows otherwise, which tells us that maybe he isn't just making everything up as he goes along, and that he does have a true goal here, as well as values that mean a lot to him. And his hilarious preoccupation with expressing his gratitude for Yomogi's good deed in episode 1 and his desire to return the favor hits harder in retrospect, as we now know that he values this kindness so much partly because of how he feels he was deprived of that all that time ago, in an event for which each party considers the opposing one to be a traitor in some way. Additionally, there are Chise's constant attempts to get her cousin Koyomi to get out of bed and see the exciting things going on outside, combined with her unwillingness to go and check it out on her own, helping us to infer a sense of dependency and reluctance to travel outside of her comfort zone and be her own person herself despite longing for more out of life, which ends up being very relevant for her feelings of isolation later. Whereas with Koyomi himself, we get more traditional bits of flashback to an uncomfortable childhood combined with his general aimlessness in life and the hints of hesitation, embarrassment, and slight bitterness in his voice as he talks to Inamoto. The approach with him is a bit less subtle, but through it we can see the lingering regrets about decisions made in his past that he carries with him in a present where he has no clear goal at a point in his life where he really should. We even get a lot of substance with the eugenicists, conveyed through things like Mujina's vague sense of bewilderment at this whole thing, kind of forced into a role that she qualifies for and should be passionate about, but just isn't. Her general disinterest is evident as she mainly seems to be tagging along, failing in her battles without putting in much effort. However, she gains renewed vigor for the cause and puts more into trying to defeat Galma after Shizumu convinces her that she'll be able to have a purpose through victory with the kaiju, that they need her, and that is her place in the world, along with finding value in taking responsibility for herself. She becomes more passionate and seems to have more fun goofing off than before, showing that she feels empowered by going in this direction. But once the kaiju stop appearing, she regresses back to that aimlessness without the battle to fuel her and ultimately accepts fighting with kaiju as her only reason to exist. It's a cautionary theme here, as the eugenicists have nothing but this, in contrast to our protagonists who use what they learned to better themselves, feeling lost when their role with the kaiju disappears, but using that experience to then decide their way forward. Combine that with the sharp juxtaposition in this first half of the story between how happy the antagonists seem to be when they're just relaxing compared to when they're fulfilling their duty of revenge, and we see that Mujina, and perhaps even the three of them as a whole deep down despite Ojina's fervent rage, feels chained to an obligation that offers no fulfillment, gratification, or reprieve. Their overall casual approach to the whole conflict is very revealing. They may feel betrayed by Galma and they may fester anger and maybe even hatred, but revenge or payback just isn't for them. Yet they fulfill their roles and go through the motions anyway, which dovetails nicely with the sense of dissatisfaction that the rest of the cast has at this point in their lives, and explains why Mujina fixates on Koyomi as a target for her frustration. Because she needs something, some excuse of a person to pin this on, and I view her focusing on Koyomi specifically as her seeing her own aimlessness in him more than the others, and without bothering to see his side of things, maybe deep underneath her guard she's irritated that someone who knows the pain of this can so easily cause it for someone else. When the kaiju disappear, she again aims that frustration at Koyomi, though she comes at it from a different angle, perhaps this time being angry at him for moving on and leaving her after she found value in the fighting, for seeming as if he is resolved and ready for a life after this. She sees that post-kaiju, he has a sense of direction and conviction, whereas she's lost again, with nothing else to do and no will to search. That contrast is maddening, and so she takes it out on him.
多分もう怪獣は現れないよ。
らしいね。
だからもう戦うこともないよ。
そっか。でもそれで、ああよかった。にはならないよ。現に怪獣は俺と俺の周りを変えてしまった。
私のこと憎い。
うん。ムジナさんはムジナさんの仕事をしてただけなんだから。
私は小読くんが憎いよ。
In the end, she settles completely despite knowing what she really wants and joins with Shizumu, committing herself to this role and saying that this is all she can do in life. And in combating Koyomi, she repeats that she despises all that he is, reflecting on how he can find something to fall back on. It makes Mujina and the eugenicists quite sad characters to me, ultimately resigned to find their purpose in this one thing, and thinking that it defines them by the end. The eugenicists are dependent and the kaiju are a crutch, and I don't think that this is framed as a good thing. Mujina enters this new existence reluctant to find her identity in this role thrust upon her, and she exits it having embraced that role as the only thing she can take from life. She sees that having nothing aside from kaiju is a horribly sad thing. But rather than look for something else like Koyomi and the others did, she reverts back and decides that this is all that she is, in a journey that ends up being much less fulfilling that is again communicated to us through these small but substantial bits of subtext. But hey, who am I to judge? Maybe they enjoy this one-dimensionality. And Shizumu, who ends up being the traditional definition of the main villain by the end, feels that very same feeling of general angst, almost more than anyone else, though his case is far different, and that is hinted at early on.
なんで怪獣は生まれてくるの?
ここだって自由な学校に見えてもみんな何かに縛られてる。そういうものから解放してくれるんだよ、怪獣はさ。
The almost sorrowful, pained look in his eye here is very quickly shown, but it's more than enough. As manifestations of people's will and emotions, for Shizumu, kaiju are the only means of expression and escape from a world in which he is bound. Though the problem here is the narrow-mindedness of his view of the method of freeing himself. He views kaiju as the only way and sees no value in a regular everyday life, with no chance to rise up and live properly without upheaval. But the reason he antithesizes our cast is that he's the sole person that really conceptualizes this common feeling as something as extreme as a binding prison. In coming together under Gauma, the others are able to find a path for themselves within the life that they felt stifled by to forge something new and purposeful. But Shizumu seeks ultimate liberation and the ideal world where kaiju are necessary without ever actually being able to comprehend the value that Yomogi sees in a regular life. A life that our protagonists yearn for as they grow closer, with Yomogi's little show of kindness way in the beginning being a precursor to his unbelievably admirable and lovable empathy, and his outlook on life in general.
怪獣の力さえあれば、時間や空間、生きることや死ぬことからも解放される。もう少しで無常の自由にたどり着けたのに、後悔はないの？
俺にはまだわからない。これから嬉しいこととか苦しいこととかを繰り返して生きていきたいから。
君たちはそうやって無自覚に自由を失い、やがて自分自身を縛っていくんだ。
俺は自由を失うんじゃないよ。かけがえのない不自由をこれから手に入れていくんだ。
やっぱりわからないな。
Even the end credits present this same sort of element through just a few still frames used for each character, primarily showing their emotional wanderlust and loneliness initially. Gauma alone at the laundromat, Chise looking soulfully on at groups of friends, Yume trying to do whatever she can to distract herself, Koyomi meandering on his own, and Yomogi being social and playing sports, but then seeming to return to that pensive state of yearning alone afterwards, with all of this being shown in individual shots split down the middle to communicate this isolation for each character. But then we slowly converge and things start to change, as we see Chise happily trying new things, the rain clearing for Yume, and Yomogi crossing over from his segregated frame to join the others, a summation of the general journey to clearer identity, motivation, and happiness that these characters go through as the story moves on, though notably with no Gauma present at the end of it, despite being there in the beginning. The attention to detail is clear. This story plants these subtle seeds to just have us think and wonder and adhere ourselves to the struggles of these characters, and it situates us in the perfect seat to see all of these threads carried out with huge impact, meaning, and catharsis by the end. Dynazenon is definitely not as conceptually ambitious or structurally bold as its predecessor in Gridman, and partly due to the laid-back attitude of the antagonists, it was never going to be a story full of huge amounts of drama and tension. But what it is a story that cares so much about investing us in these character journeys and having these different personalities interact and organically learn what they want out of life as they stumble out of or back into their doldrums. And these little hints are essential for drawing us into their world and keeping us engaged towards the end as things are carried through. Whether that results in getting a job, going to school, supporting one another, viewing life with a renewed sense of vigor, or even just moving on to wherever Galma and the eugenicists go to. The characters are all at points in their lives where they find themselves stagnant, unable to move forward and progress for differing reasons. And we're fed these tiny touches that key us into why, stringing us along emotionally as they naturally grow and slowly learn to have confidence in themselves and put their best foot forward. Stimulated by the impetuous Galma, of course, who himself is able to move slightly past his struggles thanks to the bonds he forms. Everyone has their own journey, and everyone has these small bits of meaning whose importance to both them and the story dwarfs the amount of time they linger on screen. And it is in large part through the amalgamation of all of these moments that the story of Dynazenon ends up being such a delight. Many thanks for watching.